Our final guest on today's program is Dr. Patrice Harris. She's co-founder and CEO of eMed, a digital point-of-care platform with a mission to democratize healthcare by expanding access to at-home diagnostics. She's also a former president of the American Medical Association, and I also want to say she is a friend. Dr. Harris, so great to see you again. I always love our conversations, but let me just ask you a blunt question that I know you are particularly ready to answer, I think, which is, how does racial divide and stress in this country get in the way of a healthier nation?
There's no question that this current environment where there is so much division and racial discord is really affecting mental health. And so we now have a greater understanding. I think I, as a psychiatrist, have always had this understanding, but there's a greater appreciation of the importance of mental health into overall health. So this certainly, our current climate has been contributing to the lack of healthcare, but the good news is there's recognition that there are things that we can do. Now, I have to say that there is no magic wand or one-size-fits-all solution for the current discord. But one thing I have been saying, we have to start telling the truth, and we have to make a commitment to informed, evidence-based conversations if we want to get beyond some of this divide so that we can really have the conversations we need, to improve health for everyone in this country.
Dr. Harris, let me ask you another question on this, and I want to ask a little bit about eMed. I also want to tell you I've got my great colleague and friend here, Raquel Martin, who's a Washington correspondent for the Nexstar Media Group, and I've asked her to, we're hanging out here today having this, she's got some questions for you too, but I guess the question I have on mental health and behavioral health is in the equation, the economic equation of how health is deployed and delivered in this country. I've always sort of thought the mental health part of that equation was given short shrift. Is there any correction in that? With all the healthcare reforms, with Obamacare, are we seeing the needle move a little bit so that those who need support in the mental health space are able to get it and to afford it?
So we are seeing some movement. Of course, you mentioned with the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid expansion, so many more people were able to get treatment for their substance disorders and other mental illnesses through Medicaid. So we've seen some movement, but not nearly enough. You are right. When it comes to mental health, and decades ago, it was carved out. And in some ways, you could understand that because it really was getting the short shrift. And so perhaps the thinking was back then that the only way to give it the attention it needs is to sort of carve it out. But again, now we know that it's very important to carve it back in. I'm a huge champion. So many others are huge champions of integrating mental health care into primary care. You said you were going to ask about eMed, but I do a lot and think a lot about technology. We've seen the rapid acceleration of the acceptance of telehealth right through this pandemic. And there's so much more to come and so much more opportunities regarding digital health and what we say as eMed, is digital point of care. So I believe that, and the federal government, and this seems to be a bipartisan issue. Everyone realizes that we need more funding. Stephen, I know this, and people say, especially in DC, that, some people say, well, just throw money at the problem. And I agree that sometimes money is not enough. Money is not the answer. In the case of mental health, we need more funding. There's no question. Now, we also need to look at our system of care. We need to look at workforce. Again, we need to harness technology, but certainly funding is critical. There's no question about that.
Well, let me throw over to my colleague, Raquel Martin, who I think has a question along these lines. Raquel?
Well, hello, Patrice. First off, just wanted to say hello and thank you again for joining us. But definitely wanted to chime in. I know you talked about the digital health innovation. How do we ensure that we're not widening some of these disparities as we enter into this new era of digital innovation?
That is a great question, and actually one of the reasons I decided to co-found this company. At the AMA, we realized that there were opportunities for AI and innovation to worsen health equities. And so in order not to do that, you have to talk about it up front. You have to plan for it. You have to make sure that it's not an unintended consequence, right? And so that is what we are thinking about at eMed. We really want to make sure that we widen access, but we are also at the very same time thinking as we develop technologies, again, at the beginning, in the design phase with our wonderful tech people, all right, what do we need to do to make sure we are not worsening health inequities within the technology? But we are also thinking about access. How do we communicate? Building trust. In communities that have been traditionally underserved. So it's an inside game, but it's also an outside game. But there's no question you have to have those conversations at the very beginning. You cannot wait until the unintentional consequences occur.
Patrice, let me ask you a controversial question. I'm just sort of interested in the politics of healthcare. You led, a very important medical organization, and just a few minutes ago, we had the new director of the FDA. This is I don't even know his name yet, but Dr. Robert Califf, who is he was confirmed with a 50 to 46 vote. He lost 5 Democrats. Listen to these people: Joe Manchin, Ed Markey, Richard Blumenthal, Maggie Hassan, and Bernie Sanders. Probably the only thing in the world that these 5 senators would agree on was not supporting this FDA nominee. He picked up 6 Republicans, got through. But it just raises this interesting question, less about him, than more about the politics we're in today of like 50% plus one when it comes to science, healthcare regulation. What do we need to do to get greater consensus in some of these big questions? I know that's a meta question, like not a Facebook question, but like a, my own meta question. But I mean, about what we need to do to kind of begin getting out of just a bare minimum in these. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it was very worrisome to me over the course of the pandemic that there's been a lot of misinformation and disinformation, which certainly leads to the lack of trust in medical institutions. Now, listen, we all know, and if we think about the past studies and past incidents, that in certain communities, that lack of trust is warranted, has been earned. And so I would say that we need to make sure folks like me, folks like you, and listen, I talk about the media has a responsibility to make sure that there is credible scientific information that is out there. It is not opinion. In some ways, and I joked a little bit about this, maybe there are bubbles over, someone talking. This is opinion. This is fact. But it's going to be a slog, Steve. And so we have to make sure that those of us who are interested make a commitment to truthful conversations, the science. We have to hold social media institutions accountable. And again, that's an all of society approach. That's not a problem that you nor I can solve. But I think from a broader societal approach, we need to hold those accountable to make sure that the information is credible. As a child psychiatrist, listen, we know that through the pandemic, Zoom, social media, other entities allowed us to connect when we were sheltering in place. But we also have seen the dark side of this regarding eating disorders and mental health. And so it's important that we start with the truth. We call something the truth if it's the truth. We call it a fact. There are no other words for it. And I think those of us who are interested in that, we just keep plugging along. It is very frustrating, but I think there's nothing else to do but be on a mission to continue the truth telling.
And let me just, ask one last question, Patrice. I'm not sure, and I'm going to guess, and so sorry if I'm wrong. I think you're down in Miami, right?
I'm in Atlanta today.
Oh, in Atlanta today, but eMed and your operation in Miami. So, and I asked that because one of the first mayors I interviewed early in COVID was Francis Suarez, the mayor of Miami. And I asked him what is his biggest concern, his biggest worry, and he said it's mental health. He said, look, we have suicides, we have attempted suicides, we have domestic abuse issues, we have a lot of people who need help, and right now they're not finding the cushions and the absorbers. I'd just love to get your insights as a professional in this area for people who are listening. What can we all do to be more a part of the solution in the mental health space than we are, because some people may not have a practical understanding of what needed in a time of major social stress?
Well, just a couple of things. I have a lot of answers to that. I worry a lot about stigma. Now, there are some generational differences, and the younger generation appears to be more willing to talk about mental health. By the way, I just have to commend Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka and multiple NBA and NFL players who have been open in talking about mental illness, because I think that lessens the stigma. It hopefully sends the message that you are not alone if you are experiencing any of these issues. And it's okay to seek help, by the way. And over the course of this pandemic, I've said it's also okay not to be okay. I've had my not okay days. But Steve, I cannot tell you that, it is mental health care is readily accessible and available throughout this country. We are not there. We have to get there. And it's funding. It's looking at how we harness technology. It's matching. There are some folks, and especially our younger folks, who might benefit from some peer counseling over a chat bot. I mean, I think we should all be open to some new technology. We have to make sure the evidence is there and the science is there. We have to make sure there's a continuum of services. Stephen, I know we're about out of time, but as you know, in this country, we like to think in binary terms. We're either off or on, mask or not, instead of the nuances that are more difficult to talk about. But I think if we continue to work towards, again, increasing access, workforce issues, it's a long-term issue, we can get to where there's more equitable access to mental health care.
I always learn from you. Thank you, Dr. Patrice Harris, co-founder and CEO of eMed, former president and the first Black woman president of the American Medical Association. Good friend. Let me know when you're in D.C., and thanks so much for joining us today.
I sure will. Thank you, Steve.
That brings us to the end of our program. A very big thank you to the Equitable and Just National Climate Platform for its support, and to all of you attendees. For anybody who missed these conversations this afternoon, we're going to have the video from all these conversations up on our website shortly. Raquel Martin, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had a good time.
Had a great time. It was
You'll come back?
Definitely would come back.
Yeah,
definitely enlightened conversation with so many great leaders. So happy to have me.
Oh,
I'm happy to be here. Glad you had me.
Well, this is my first tangible benefit of our new partnership with Nexstar, so thank you. Look, I want to thank everybody for joining us. These are important issues. Listen to the videos, share them. I'm Steve Clemons. Be well.